My parents said I was too emotional when I cried after losing my job, so I cut ties, built an empire, and watched them fade. I'm a 27-year-old guy, and in my family, emotions were treated like some kind of disease, especially if you were a boy. Crying, that wasn't allowed. Not even when I broke my arm at 10 after falling off my bike. I was sobbing on the kitchen floor, and my dad looked down at me and said, "Get up, you're not made of glass." My mom just muttered, "We don't have time for drama," as she packed Lindsay's lunch. That was the moment I learned pain was something to hide, not something to be helped through. Lindsay, my older sister, could cry and throw tantrums and still end up with hugs and ice cream. She'd scream about not wanting to go to school, slam her bedroom door, and Mom would whisper, "She's just sensitive." But if I so much as flinched at a raised voice, I was being soft, too much, a boy who needed to toughen up. So I did. I taught myself how to lock it all down: anger, sadness, even joy. I'd feel my chest swell when I got a good grade or won a little art contest at school. Too much excitement makes you look desperate. I'd hear in my father's voice, even when he wasn't there. Over the years, I became someone who flinched at his own feelings. I was so good at pretending I didn't feel anything that sometimes I started to believe it. Like if I could just keep everything buried deep enough, it would stop hurting, but it never did. I didn't understand how broken I was, how numb and wired for rejection. The day I lost everything and cried like a child again, alone, the first time I felt genuinely proud of myself was when I got the offer letter from VPAU's, a creative agency. Followed since college, it was my dream job, a junior designer role, but in a company that actually cared about storytelling, art, and purpose. I remember just staring at the email in disbelief, rereading the line, "We'd love to welcome you aboard," I cried, quietly. Not a loud sob, just this deep, shaking release in my chest, like something I'd been gripping for years had finally let go. And then I called my parents. My dad answered. I told him the news, and there was this long pause. Then he said, "Okay, hope it pays more than your last one. No congratulations. No, I'm proud of you." Nothing, just the sound of the TV in the background and him clearing his throat. My mom came on the line right after and said, "What's the company called again? Is it real?" Then added, "Well, good. Maybe you'll finally move out of your feelings and into the real world." That line stung more than I expected, because I had moved into the real world. I'd worked 2 retail jobs during college, built a design portfolio from scratch, and taken freelance gigs for next to nothing just to gain experience. I had clawed my way into this opportunity, but in their eyes, it wasn't success unless it fit their checklist: cold, practical, emotionless. Meanwhile, when Lindsay got hired for a 1-month assistant gig at some influencer's brand, they took her out to dinner, bought her a new purse to look professional. I didn't even get a "well done," just silence. And in that silence, something inside me shifted. A quiet voice whispering, "They'll never see you. No matter what you do." I spent the next year pouring myself into that job like it was the only thing tethering me to worth. Late nights, missed birthdays, skipping meals just to finish a pitch deck or meet a deadline, but it didn't feel like sacrifice. It felt like purpose. For the first time, I wasn't just useful. I was valued, or so I thought. The day the layoffs were announced, I had just wrapped a successful campaign. I walked into the morning meeting, still buzzing with adrenaline. That buzz turned to ice when HR said, "Unfortunately, your position is being dissolved effective immediately." No warning, no explanation, just a folder with exit papers and a pat on the back. I made it all the way to the parking garage before I broke. I sat in my car, staring at the steering wheel as tears blurred my vision. The sobs came hard, violent, gut-level, ugly sobs that made my chest ache. I gripped the wheel like it could hold me together, but nothing could. I wasn't just mourning the job. I was mourning every lie I'd told myself to get there. That hard work would earn love. That success would finally make me enough. That if I was useful, they'd care. I called my mom. I don't know why. I guess I just needed someone to say, "That's awful. I'm here." Instead, she sighed and said, "This is why you can't get too emotional about things. It's just a job." Then my dad chimed in from the background. "Told you the artsy stuff wouldn't last." I didn't respond. I just ended the call mid-sentence. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel sad. I felt hollow, like I'd finally run out of reasons to keep trying with them. I moved back into my parents' house 2 days after the layoff. Tail between my legs and savings barely enough to last a month. I told myself it was temporary, just long enough to regroup, apply for new jobs, maybe pick up freelance work. But the minute I walked in the door, I felt 16 again small, unwanted, and in the way. At dinner, the jab started almost immediately. "Maybe now you'll consider something practical," my dad said. Cutting into his steak without looking at me, my mom added, "You know, Lindsay's company is hiring admin assistants. She could put in a word unless that's beneath you." I wanted to scream. Not because of what they said, but because of how normal it felt, how automatic their dismissiveness was. Lindsay got sympathy when she broke up with a guy she dated for 3 months. I lost the job I'd dreamed about for years, and I got passive-aggressive job postings taped to my door. I found one the second week I was home. It was a printout from some warehouse listing circled in red Sharpie. On the back, in my dad's handwriting, "This will toughen you up." I stared at it for a long time. Then I crumpled it and tossed it in the trash later that night. I heard my parents on the phone with my aunt. "He's still sulking. You know how sensitive he is? Can't take a single setback without falling apart." I sat in the hallway, knees pulled to my chest, listening through the wall. That's when I realized I wasn't healing here. I was rotting, and if I didn't leave soon, they were going to bury me alive in their version of who I was supposed to be. I left at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. I remember the time because I stared at the clock on my dashboard for almost an hour before driving off. I packed only what I could fit into my old Civic-Sim clothes, my laptop, a sketch pad, and a coffee mug Lindsay gave me years ago that said, "Do what you love," in peeling gold letters. The irony wasn't lost on me. I didn't have a plan, just this voice in my chest that said, "You can't stay here. Not another second." I drove until the highway lights blurred into a soft glow, and finally pulled into a 24-hour gas station lot. Parked in the corner, turned off the engine, and exhaled. It wasn't glamorous. The seat didn't recline all the way, and the air reeked of gasoline and burnt coffee from the station's food counter. But for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel watched, judged, pinned beneath invisible expectations. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, with only the sound of trucks passing in the distance. And I cried again, but this time it felt different. Not like weakness, more like truth leaking out, the kind of cry that doesn't beg for help, but makes space for something new. The next morning, I bought a notebook from the gas station rack and started writing. Not applications, just thoughts, pain, rage, things I'd never said out loud. Why do they love Lindsay's tears but hate mine? Why does trying feel pathetic when I do it? Why am I only valuable when I'm silent? I didn't know it then, but that little notebook, that was the first seed of something bigger, something they couldn't belittle or take credit for. Mechanism, a way to keep myself from unraveling. I filled that cheap notebook with everything: the guilt, the resentment, the ache of being invisible. The gas station became my routine coffee in the morning. Charge my phone, right? One day, out of impulse or desperation, I typed up a few pages and posted them anonymously on a mental health forum. I titled it, "When You're Told Your Feelings Don't Matter." I went back to my car afterward, thinking nothing of it, but when I checked the post the next morning, it had exploded. Thousands of upvotes, hundreds of comments. People were saying things like, "This feels like you read my mind, and I didn't know anyone else went through this." Someone wrote, "You should write more." I'd read a whole book. I stared at the screen, stunned. It wasn't just pity they related. My pain wasn't just my own. It was a mirror for people who had been shamed for crying, silenced for being too much, broken down by families who measured love in control. Then came a private message. It was from a woman named Marielle who ran a small wellness blog. She said she wanted to publish my post and asked if I'd be willing to write a weekly piece. It didn't pay much, just a couple $100 a month, but it was something more importantly. It felt like purpose, like someone had reached through the fog and said, "Hey, I see you." I wrote back, yes, heart pounding, hands shaking. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't even think they'd understand. But deep down, a new part of me had started to flicker, one they spent years trying to smother. And this time, I wasn't letting it go. I called it permission to feel. The name came to me while staring at a blinking cursor in a library parking lot, typing from the free Wi-Fi. I wanted the title to say what I'd never heard growing up, that it was okay to break down, to feel deeply, to not be fine all the time. Mariel published my first piece the following week, a raw post about crying in a gas station parking lot and not knowing who to call. Within days, it had nearly 100,000 views. I reread the comments like prayers. I needed this today. This sounds like me. My father said the same thing to me when I was a kid. Every message, every quiet thank you was like a tiny stitch in a wound I didn't know could heal. I kept writing once a week, then twice, sometimes about the job loss, sometimes about the strange grief that comes from having living parents who feel emotionally dead soon. People began submitting their own stories. Messages from men who said they hadn't cried in years, women who were told they were too intense for having opinions, teens who were afraid to speak at the dinner table. I started collecting them, curating them, responding with care. When Mariel offered to give me a permanent section of her site, I said yes without hesitation. I called it the Feel Room. And suddenly, this tiny crack in my life, the layoff, the notebook. The post became a doorway. I wasn't just writing anymore. I was building a space, a safe one. And the people who found it, they were the first to ever make me feel like being emotional wasn't a curse. It was a language. And finally, I wasn't speaking it alone. It had been 5 months since I left my parents' house when my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. The caller ID said Mom, and my first instinct was to silence it and keep working on my next post. But something in me was curious. Maybe they'd seen the blog. Maybe this was an apology. Maybe anything. I answered with a cautious, hey. She didn't ask how I was. Didn't ask where I'd been. Her voice was clipped, almost annoyed. Your sister's engagement party is next month. You need to be there. And we could use help with the expenses. I blinked. That was it. No mention of my job loss, my blog, the fact I'd been homeless for weeks. You're asking me for money, I said, my voice tight. She sighed. It's a family event. Don't make this about you. Just show up and act normal for once. I felt my throat close up. That old familiar burn of being shamed for simply reacting. I said, you didn't ask if I was okay when I lost everything. She snapped back. We've all had hard times. You think you're the only one who struggles. And there it was again, dismissal, wrapped in fake wisdom, a refusal to hold space for anything she couldn't control or comprehend. I hung up, not in anger. In finality, then, I blocked her number. Not because I hated her, but because I finally loved myself enough to walk away. And yet, after the call, I sat there for 20 minutes, staring at the wall, not because I missed her, but because even after all this time, a part of me still wished she had said, I'm sorry. I didn't go to Lindsay's engagement party. I didn't send money. I didn't reply to the follow-up texts that came pouring in days before the event, first from my mom, then from my dad, and finally from Lindsay herself. The messages started off polite. Hey, haven't heard from you. Are you coming? Then they turned sharp. Don't be selfish. This isn't about you. And finally, bitter. Wow, you've really changed. And yeah, I had, not because I wanted to hurt anyone, but because for the first time in my life, I wasn't willing to hurt myself to keep others comfortable. I watched their texts come in like echoes from an old life I'd finally grown out of. In the past, I would have caved, driven hours just to be the good son, smiled through backhanded compliments, paid for things I couldn't afford just to avoid being called ungrateful, but not this time. Instead, I made tea, sat on my balcony, watched the sunset, and then I opened my inbox. I had an email from a young man in Germany who'd read one of my blog posts. He wrote, I showed your article to my father. We had a 3-hour conversation after that. Thank you for making space for people like us. I stared at that email for a long time because it reminded me my silence wasn't empty. It was full of purpose. Every no I gave to them was a yes to myself, and the more I pulled away from the people who raised me, the more I stepped into the man I was becoming, one who didn't need to be seen to exist, one who didn't need their guilt to feel whole, peace, and a little room to breathe. I never thought helping people feel would pay my bills. 6 months after I posted my first journal entry, Permission to Feel had become more than a blog. It was a platform, a movement, a home for people who'd spent their whole lives being told to suck it up. Marielle and I met in person for the first time at a coffee shop in Chicago. She looked at me and said, "You don't realize it yet, but you've created something that could change everything." She offered to help build a team, expand the brand, maybe even turn it into a full-blown mental health platform. I didn't hesitate. We partnered with a therapist who offered to design guided courses around emotional literacy, shame, anger, inner child work. We hired writers who had lived through narcissistic families, religious trauma, toxic masculinity, and still found their voice. I wasn't just writing anymore. I was leading. The money came slower than the healing, but it came: sponsorships, donations, a small monthly membership that offered exclusive stories, audio reflections, and community Q&As. In a year, Permission to Feel became a six-figure business, and what's wild is, I still cried. I cried when our first course hit 10,000 downloads. I cried when a father wrote to say his teenage son finally opened up to him after reading our work. I cried when I got the first check. That meant I didn't have to choose between rent and groceries. But now, my tears weren't shameful. They were sacred. They were proof that I'd survived the place that tried to erase them. And every time I let myself feel fully, I reclaimed one more piece of the boy who wasn't allowed. 2.1 feeling at a time, one post at a time. 1 life-changing breath at a time. It started with a forwarded screenshot from my cousin, a post my mom had shared on Facebook, Permission to Feel, with a caption that read, "So proud of our son and his work in mental health." I blinked at the screen like it was a hallucination. No text, no call, no apology. Just a public post from the same woman who once told me crying was a waste of everyone's time. At first, I didn't know how to feel. There was a time I would have given anything to hear them say they were proud, but now, it just felt hollow. I scrolled through her page. She had shared multiple posts, cherry-picked ones, that made me sound polished, successful, impressive. Never the ones about crying in my car, or sleeping behind gas stations, or the deep scars their voices left. It wasn't pride. It was performance. They didn't want me back. They wanted the version of me they could brag about at church, the one who turned out just fine so they could erase the parts they broke. A week later, my dad left me a voicemail. His voice was stiff, like he was reading from a script. "We're hearing good things. Maybe we could catch up sometime. Would be nice to reconnect." I listened to it once, then deleted it. Not because I was angry, but because I finally understood the difference between being missed and being useful. And I wasn't useful to them when I was hurting. Only now that I was thriving. Now that they could spin the story, now that I could make them look good, but I had built this life without their love. Didn't need their validation to keep living it. It was a Tuesday night when I saw her name flash across my phone. Hadn't spoken to her since I left. Not because I hated her, but because she always played the golden child role so effortlessly. It hurt just to be around her. At first, I thought it was a pocket dial. Then came the text, "Can we talk? Please." I didn't answer right away, but something about the word please made me hesitate. It was the first time she'd ever asked for anything gently. When I finally picked up the call, her voice was unrecognizable, shaky, small. "He cheated," she whispered. "He left me, and I lost my job last month. I'm back home with Mom and Dad." There was a long pause. I said nothing. I was bracing myself for sarcasm or manipulation, but it didn't come. She started crying. They're being awful, cold, judgmental, like I'm some failure who embarrassed them. I closed my eyes. The same script, the same silence I once screamed into. "Now I understand what you meant," she said, voice cracking. "I'm sorry I didn't before." I didn't know what to say. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt grief. Grief for both of us, for the version of Lindsay who thought she was loved because she was special, and for the version of me who thought he wasn't loved because he was broken. We were just two sides of the same broken house. Asterisk, I didn't offer to fix her problems. I didn't rush to rescue her. But I didn't hang up either, because for the first time, my sister wasn't talking to me from a pedestal. She was sitting beside me. On the floor, 3 weeks after Lindsay's call, I got the text. It was from my mom. "Your father is sick. We're at Memorial Hospital. You should come. He may not have long." I read it 3 times. My fingers hovered over the screen, but I didn't type anything. Not right away. There was a time I would have rushed to the ER without thinking. That little boy inside me still hoped that in crisis they might finally say, "We love you. We're sorry." But now I wasn't sure if I was going for them. Or for me. I showed up the next morning, walked into a sterile white room that smelled like sanitizer and time running out. My dad looked smaller, pale, tired, tubes wrapped around his hands. Machines blinked beside him like silent metronomes. He opened his eyes when he saw me, didn't smile, just said, "I didn't think you'd come." I shrugged. Neither did I. The silence between us was heavy, not angry, just full of things that had never been said then. His voice cracked barely above a whisper. "I didn't know how to love you. I only knew how to make you tough. I felt everything and nothing all at once. Like the words bounced off armor I didn't know I was still wearing. You made me strong." "Yeah," I said quietly. "But you also made me afraid to feel anything without shame." He closed his eyes. A tear slid down his cheek, and I cried too. Not because he was dying. Not even because I forgave him, but because this was the first time in my life. I cried in front of my father, and he didn't flinch. He didn't mock me. He didn't look away. He just let it happen. And that, somehow, was enough. After that hospital visit, I didn't go back. I sent a card, checked in once by text, but I didn't sit by his bedside. I didn't play the prodigal son. I didn't revert to the version of myself who would have bent over, backward for a crumb of emotional approval. Anymore, and I realized something on that visit, something I never thought I'd feel. I didn't need them to change in order to heal. I just needed to stop waiting for them. 2. My mom texted me a few days later. "He really appreciated you coming. Maybe we can all move forward now." Move forward. As if decades of emotional neglect could be skipped over like an awkward chapter in a book. As if the only thing standing in the way was me. I stared at the message and felt no urge to reply. Not out of spite, not out of rage, out of peace. Because finally, I had nothing left to prove. No fight left to pick. No apology to beg for. I didn't block her. I didn't send some final speech. I just let the silence stretch out like fresh air in a house that had always reeked of control. Lindsay and I kept in touch, though slowly, carefully. She'd send me updates, little ones. Got an interview, made it through the week. Nothing heavy. Just small signs of life, trying to regrow in both of us, and it was enough. I didn't want revenge anymore. I didn't want dramatic closure. I just wanted peace that didn't come with conditions. And for the first time, I knew I could have that, even if it meant never hearing "I love you" from them again. Over the next 2 years, my life kept growing without them in it. Permission to Feel became more than just a platform. It became a brand. We launched our first printed journal, sold out in 48 hours. Our podcast hit the top charts in mental health and wellness. I gave my first TEDx talk titled, "Feeling Isn't Weakness, It's Data." And the craziest part, I didn't even feel imposter syndrome because I wasn't pretending. I wasn't performing. I wasn't chasing anyone's approval. I was just me, the version of me they once tried to shrink into silence. The version they said would never make it in the real world. The world they warned me about. I built something better, one feeling at a time, one broken rule at a time. I didn't gloat. I didn't send them my articles or flaunt my wins, but I knew they saw it. Family friends started reaching out. People from their church subscribed to the newsletter. My cousin texted me a photo once, my dad reading one of my printed interviews at the kitchen table. I stared at that photo for a long time, not because I wanted them back, but because there was something oddly satisfying about knowing. They had to sit with what they tried to realize it bloomed anyway, not in spite of my feelings, but because of them. They didn't get to take credit. They didn't get to rewrite the story. They just faded quietly. Like background noise, I finally learned to tune out, and I flourished loudly, boldly, softly, in full color, with every emotion they once told me to bury. If you've ever been told you're too much, too emotional, too sensitive, I want you to hear this from someone who lived in that silence. You're not broken. You were just raised in a world that punished softness and praised numbness. A world that confused emotional distance with strength. a family maybe, that only applauded you when you didn't need anything from them. I get it. I spent most of my life thinking I had to earn love by being quiet, useful, invisible. I thought strength meant swallowing grief, shame, and fear like vitamins. I thought tears made me unworthy. But here's the truth. Your feelings are not a liability. They're the roadmap to who you really are. Pain is a signal. Tears are release. Anger is often grief in disguise. And numbness? That's the armor we wear when feeling becomes too dangerous. You don't need to apologize for how deeply you care. You don't need to prove your worth by being tough enough. The world doesn't need more emotionless shells pretending to be okay. It needs more people brave enough to say, I'm not fine, and that's okay. I built an empire out of the parts of me they tried to shame, not to spite them, but to honor the version of me they couldn't handle. So if you're reading this, and your voice still shakes when you speak your truth, speak it anyway. If you cry and feel stupid for it, cry anyway because you don't need permission to feel, but if you do, here it is.